Morning, everyone. Hey, extra early morning. You can kind of tell. Yeah, I know. I woke up, my alarm went, and I thought, man, this feels early. So I hit snooze, and hopefully it doesn't get reflected in the message this morning. Um, as Steve mentioned, we are kicking off this series called Easter People, and it's a look at characters, people, real people that we find in the story around Easter, around the resurrection. And there are some incredible stories when you actually get into um, looking at the stories about these people behind their stories, how they became who they are, their connection with Jesus. Um, I'm convinced that every one of us is able to at least identify with somebody that we find at the resurrection. And probably many of us will identify with pieces of everyone we look at. This week, I'm pretty excited about who we're going to be talking about this morning. Um, how many people here um, uh, can give me the names of all 12 of Jesus' disciples? Peter? Good. Right. Bartholomew, yeah. Yeah, and by the way, if I'm acting like I'm keeping track, I couldn't do it, right? Um, the 12 disciples are a huge part of the early church, part of Jesus' ministry, and 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 yet we can't recite the names, and several of them we really know very little about. They're just names on a list. Um, Many of them are identified by who they are in terms of their their parents. If James and John are the sons of Zebedee, right? Um, Matthew, the tax collector, right? And as we go through these names, many of the disciples are identified by who their family is. Um, you got, uh, Andrew, brother of Peter. What do we know about Peter? What did he do? Come on, you know this one. He's a fisherman, right? We know people or their identity by either who their family was or by their vocation. Um, but the interesting thing about the person that we're going to be talking about now is that she wasn't known by any of those. Um, Mary Magdalene is known not because of her famous husband. She's not known because of whose daughter she is. She's not known by some special skills that she has. She's simply known as a person from a place, from Magdala, which is really significant. And we can kind of just read over that and not think anything of it, but especially for someone in that era, very seldom are they known by the place they come from. And in some of the commentaries that I read, they said that if someone was known for being from a place, then that place was known for that person. It's kind of interesting, right? Jesus of Nazareth. Um, that the place somehow identified with the person. And so when we talk about Mary Magdalene, she actually is identified for this place where she was from, Magdala or Magdala. I'm horrible at pronouncing things if you haven't been here long enough to know that. And you can see where she is, so where the town is, on the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum, that's where Peter was fishing. He originally was from Bethsaida. You look over here to the left, you can see Cana. What was the cool thing that happened at Cana? Wedding, right? Boy. Okay, why don't we just go back and come back here in an hour or something, right? There's a wedding at Cana. You can see Nazareth there. That's where Jesus is from. And we have this place, Magdala, where Mary is from. Mary is known not because of the people around her. She is known because of her. And that is pretty significant. When we're looking at Mary, and the interesting thing is, Mary Magdalene is mentioned more times in the Bible than most of the disciples. She's this really, really interesting person. And so when we pick up the story at Easter, there are several places where this gets talked about, where she gets talked about. And so we pick it up in Mark chapter 16, and it goes like this. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome. Now, is that Salome or Salome? Salome? Okay. Because salami would not work. Bought spices. Bought spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus' body. You notice that they didn't just bring spices, they actually bought spices. Mary took her own money to serve in her own ministry. Right? And the story goes on. Bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? Right? And you can kind of, so the setting is that Jesus was crucified, he was buried, you have this Sabbath where you can't do anything, and the Sabbath ends at sunset, and then the day starts at sunset, right? And so this Mary Magdalene had watched Jesus die, says in places that she observed the burial of Jesus, and then she has been sitting there for a day just thinking about this. And she has a plan. Part of her ministry is now she had cared for Jesus, and now she's caring for Jesus' mother, and she is walking with her through this, and she wants to get doing something. She is grieving, and she wants to care for Jesus in his death, just as she had cared for him in his life. This is, what can I do for Jesus now? And so as she gets up, that's the mission that she is on. And as they are walking there, they're going, okay, 3 of us, I saw that stone when it was rolled in place. How are we going to deal with this? And Mary doesn't turn around and go, oh, it's hopeless. We can't do this. Let's go find people to move the stone. She just keeps marching on her mission, expecting there will be a problem that she has to solve, but she isn't solving the problem until she faces it. And she walks up to this, and the story goes on. It says, but when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. As you would be too, right? You're going to deal with this corpse, and you go into the tomb, and you see somebody sitting up, and it's not the person that you were coming to embalm. They were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, appropriately the angel says. He said, you are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He was risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. He's risen. He's not here. Here's the proof. He's not here. Which really isn't much proof, right? like if you go and if you heard that somebody had passed away and you go to the funeral home and they say, hey, look, an empty casket. He must have raised from the dead. You're going to go, no, it's just an empty casket. Where did you put him? Right? I saw him die. And so as the angel says, so here's the proof that he's raised from the dead. He's not here. It's not like real proof. It's not real proof until you see the resurrected person. All you know is that there is an absence of a body. He is not here. So the place where they laid him, but go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anybody because they were afraid. Now, a while ago, we were talking, we walked through the book of Mark, right? And based on your ability to answer questions thus far, I'm not even going to ask, but Peter is credited with dictating the book of Mark to Mark, right? And if you read through the book of Mark, you can see that. If you know that that is the way it was produced, then you can see Mark going to Peter and saying, okay, resurrection, what happened on the resurrection? And Peter, whom I've never met, but from what I read, doesn't have like a huge attention span. And so he just goes, okay, we have to do this now? Yeah, we have to do this now. Okay. So here's the deal. There was Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, some other people, and they went to the tomb. They found the tomb empty, and the angel said, Jesus is risen, and go tell the disciples. And I remember it really being terrifying, right? And you can kind of sum that up in what gets written here. And so then, if we look at John's account as he writes this story, it's a little more detailed, and it's not so rushed. In fact, if you look in your Bibles, after verse 8, there is a section, verse 9 and so on, in this chapter of Mark, that you'll have a note in it that says, these verses were not in the oldest manuscripts we find, right? And it's like there's a scribe somewhere along the line in the last 2,000 years that read this and goes, this isn't enough detail. So then they go on to write, this is Mary Magdalene who was delivered from 7 demons. The disciples, there were some other people that saw the resurrected Jesus, but the disciples didn't believe it. And if you read through that, it's just like there just isn't enough detail in what Peter writes or what Mark writes from what Peter said. And I find it really interesting. So when we read in John, who probably read the book of Mark and Peter's accounts, he writes a little more detail into his account of the resurrection. So we find that in John chapter 20. And he says, like the same general stuff is there. He says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. She came running to Simon Peter and to the other disciple, the one Jesus loved. Right? And as you read this account, John doesn't name himself. He gives himself this nickname. So there's Peter and there's me, the one Jesus loved. Right? And you go, well, it's a little bit arrogant, but he didn't want to be known as the son of Zebedee anymore, the son of thunder. Didn't want to be known as, James' brother. He wanted to be known because of his relationship with Jesus. And so he is John, the one Jesus loved. If he gets to write his own story, that's how he will be identified. And it's not that he was exclusively loved. All of them were loved. But his identity was his relationship with Jesus, not his relationship to his Father. So, and John thinks that there are some pretty important details that Peter missed in this whole account when he told it to Mark. So it goes like this. He says, and they said, this is what Mary says, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. So the story goes on. So Peter and the other disciples started to the tomb and for the tomb, and John thinks this is important. Steve has pointed this out before, that John thinks it's important that these details of the account get included. Both were running. So there's Peter and there's John. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter, right? And reached the tomb first. It's like, anyway, apparently that mattered. And then he goes, to emphasize how much he beat him by, he goes, he bent over, looked in at the strips of the linen lying there, but did not go in. So he runs there, he stops, he looks into the tomb. Then Simon Peter came along behind him. It's like, then fat boy Peter makes it to the tomb. It's kind of how it's going here. And went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, John, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside and saw and believed. What did they believe? What did Mary tell them? He was stolen. Said they believed that the body was moved. And another one of these cases, like what happens in the back part of Mark, somewhere along the line in the last couple thousand years, somebody put this note in as they were translating the Bible. It says they still did not understand in the scripture Jesus had to raise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. And then we pick up Mary again. And Mary stood outside the tomb crying. You need to understand this about Mary. Mary wasn't kind of dedicated to the service of Jesus. Mary didn't have a plan B. Mary was all in on this. Jesus had died. She was going to care for Jesus in his death as she had cared for him in his life, and now she couldn't care for him. There wasn't a plan B. When Jesus was at the tomb and crying, as she wept, she bent over, looked into the tomb, and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" Said, "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. She was not looking for a risen Jesus. She didn't expect a risen Jesus. She was just looking for the body of Jesus so she could care for him. He asked her, "Woman, Why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." She doesn't say, "Bring him back." She doesn't say, "You can't do this." She doesn't accuse him of anything. She just asks if he knows where he is, just tell her so she can go get him and finish her mission. Jesus said, and I love this, "Mary." When Mary heard Jesus call her by name, he recognized the voice because she was in this relationship where he had called her name before. He loved her. She knew him. She turned toward him and cried out Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." And you can read this as don't touch me, but it's not that. When Mary sees Jesus, she goes, "Oh, we can go back to where we were. Finally, we can go back to the way we had it." And Jesus says to her, or at least this is what it seems he is saying to her, is don't hold on to this moment because this isn't permanent. We aren't going back to where we were. There's a new relationship. Don't hold on to me as though I am here to stay. Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. So powerful how he addresses Mary. It's like, we are in this together. My Father, your Father, my God, your God. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. So what I find really interesting when we look at Mary and in these accounts, there's several things that we see about her that we don't necessarily just capture just by reading through the story, just looking at her as a character. But if we understand the environment that she faced in first century Palestine, if we understand the restrictions that she had, there are some incredible things that she accomplishes. Number one, she was known by a place. She didn't come from an influential family. She didn't come from an influential husband. She didn't have an influential career. She was just known as Mary from a place. And the place itself was not like Rome. It was just a town. She was financially successful. We'll read a little bit here that she served Jesus and the disciples and fed them out of her own resources. She wasn't just a volunteer. She provided for the ministry. That money came from somewhere. It came from her. She was financially successful. She was generous. She was dedicated to the mission. The way that she served Jesus in his life, she was going to serve him in his death. She was caring for Jesus' mother. She was doing whatever she could for Jesus. She needed to care for his body. She was going to do that. She was dedicated to the mission of serving Jesus. She was courageous. When we get to this, and we will at some point over the next few weeks, when Jesus was on the cross being crucified, there was the disciple John, there was Jesus' mother, and there was Mary Magdalene at the crucifixion site. Where are all the other disciples? It's a pretty tough time to be a disciple when your rabbi is being crucified. Pretty good chance they won't say, hey, you were with him. We got a cross for you too. But Mary, she is right there. She is dedicated to the mission at the risk of her own life. She is not afraid to be identified with the accused. She's a natural leader. There's 14 times that she's mentioned in the Bible. 9 of them she's listed with a group of other women, and she is always listed first. She is the natural leader of this group. She has no official appointment to be this leader. Jesus, or at least we don't read that Jesus said, and Jesus set up, he named the 12 disciples, and then he went on to name the support team. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that he picked a leader. She just became what she was supposed to be. She didn't need a title. She is mentioned more in the Bible than most of the 12 disciples. That's why we know this stuff about her. And I love this. With an account that we just read, Jesus bypassed Peter and John to reveal his risen self to her first. You ever catch that before? Like when we read this, she sees the empty tomb, she runs and gets Peter and John, we get that whole race to the tomb, and there they see the empty tomb and they believe, they leave, and Jesus shows up for Mary who is still there. He could have showed up a little bit early if he wanted to. It is so amazing that Jesus decided that the person he was going to reveal his resurrected self to first is Mary from Magdala. So how did she get there? Right? How does somebody who's just known for a place, how does she become this person who has this incredibly special relationship with Jesus? And there's all kinds of false history. Some suggest that she was a prostitute. There's absolutely nothing in Scripture or true history to suggest that she was a prostitute. By all indications, she was some businesswoman who had encountered Jesus and used those gifts to serve Jesus. But how does she become this person? And it's absolutely incredible. See, we first encounter Mary Magdalene in Luke. And after this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him. And this is talking about Jesus in his ministry. And then it goes like this. And also some women who had been cured, maybe underline that, who had been cured from evil spirits and diseases. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. See, Mary gained the love for Jesus because of her healing from Jesus or by Jesus. And her ability to serve Jesus came from her freedom from being imprisoned by the accuser, by the demons. Now, if you've ever been around somebody who is tormented, actually, I'll get there. So then the list goes on. It's interesting. There's other influential people there. Influential women. Joanna, the wife of Chusa, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna and many others. So Herod's chief manager, his wife was somebody who traveled around with Jesus. This is Herod, who had John the Baptist's head cut off. Right? There were some other influential people there. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. They just paid for the stuff. They had the money to do it. They volunteered. They worked so that they could contribute to the ministry. So when you are tormented by the accuser, you become an accuser yourself. The clear indication that you are being tormented by the accuser, by Satan, is that you will accuse and blame others. It's really, really simple. Satan doesn't want you to know this, but if you are constantly blaming other people for your state, then you are being influenced by the accuser. You blame others for your state. You can blame the system. You can blame your parents. You can blame your experiences. You can blame your gender. You can blame all kinds of things, saying that, if this was different or if this hadn't happened to me, then I would be really good at serving God. All right? You blame other things and other people for the reason why you aren't walking wholeheartedly free in your gifting. You and I know people who are absolutely gifted spiritually and horribly tormented demonically. It's this whole yo-yo effect, right? Where you see something incredible that they do, where God works powerfully through them, and then you see them destroy all the relationships around them that affects what's going on in their ministry. And if you listen, it's all about accusing. If the system was different, then I would be able to fully function in my gifting. Tell that to Mary Magdalene. If there was anyone who had everything stacked against them, it's her. She had no reason to be successful financially. She had no reason to be able to lead. She wasn't appointed as a leader. She had no reason to do the things she did. She had no reason to have this special relationship with Jesus other than she became free to become her fully created self. And she was able to do all the things God created her to be. In freedom from the accuser, Mary became her created self. When she became free from the accuser, she became free from accusing. And when you read about what Mary did, she didn't say, here I am, I have this, leadership gift. Jesus didn't pick me as a disciple. Right? You don't read that. You don't read any sort of resentment towards the 12 disciples because she wasn't one of them. She spent her money to serve them. She became all she was supposed to be in a system that shouldn't have allowed her to become that. See, what happens is anger and resentment become peaceful humility and genuine gratitude when we walk in freedom. We all know people who have these incredible gifts, but aren't able to walk freely in them because the accuser keeps shooting them down and saying, you're not getting the respect that you deserve. That's one of Satan's favorite statements. They don't get you. You're not getting the respect you deserve. And you can choose to walk in that lie and never become all you were created to be, or you can get deliverance. It's not just okay, I'm not going to be this way. It's actually making the effort to be delivered. Are you happy with where you're at? God has called you to walk in this incredible freedom, and we decide if we want to stay stuck listening to all the excuses of why we aren't able to be walking in freedom. It's really our choice. It's not an instant response, but it is a direction you choose. So here's the thing. Why did Jesus and Mary have this special relationship? I'm pretty convinced that the reason Jesus wanted to reveal his resurrected self to him first is because he saw in her the beauty of what he created her to be, truly lived out. You will never get there if you are walking in the voice of the accuser, giving you reason to accuse. You will only get there if you listen to God telling you who he created you to be.